How much effect do we have over others? Everest is a good way to understand this, as we will see in this high-altitude story. In 2019, about 900 people climbed the summit of Everest, with 11 deaths, or about 1%. Despite these positive statistics, the media still prefers to focus on the 1%. Once again, there was lots of hand-raising about the deaths. For the families, of course, there is the only story that matters. There are many stories of blame, but we rarely hear about the stories of heroism. But it's not that they don't exist. You have probably heard many stories of climbers stepping off corpses or letting others die without trying to help them. If 1% die on Everest, a much greater percentage than that have come close to death, but have returned to tell the story. Some of them found the inner strength to find their way out of difficulties, while others needed the encouragement and help of teammates, Sherpas, guides, and members of other teams. Every year, there are heroic stories of Everest rescue, but rarely you hear of them. One of the reasons you don't hear about these stories is because they really need to be told by the victim, and often they either don't want to talk about the problems they cause for others, or are ashamed of what happened. They consider it a failure, even if in reality it's not at all. John on Everest was already struggling when he reached the South Col after a strenuous climb up the Lhotse face from country. The South Col is the widespread plateau at 8,000 meters between Everest and its sister mountain, Lhotse, the fourth highest mountain in the world. The Southern Col is almost 1,000 meters below the summit, and is the launch pad for the summit anthems. Most of the teams left for the summit on the evening of their arrival at the col, and climbed during the night. But when John got there, a strong wind was blowing across the col, and the best they could was curl up in their tents. Besides, he had already decided it would be too much to ask to get to the top the next day. He sent the following message to his wife. "My climb is over. I have never suffered like this. 2 great days to get to the base camp and then relax and warm up." But in the middle of the night the wind died down, and the next day it was clear and sunny. John's team stayed on the hill that morning, and at some point that day he changed his mind and sent another message to his wife. "What a difference a day makes. He will aim to the summit at 8 tonight. Good weather, I feel charged." The next morning he realized that what he had dreamed of for 40 years and stopped on the summit of Everest. According to his account of the climb, it had been a relatively easy climb for him. It wasn't hot and he felt strong, but the queue of climbers had frustrated him, because over 300 people reached the summit that day. He estimated that in total nearly 5 hours were added to the march, due to delays on the ascent and descent. Indeed, his ascent has been far from simple, and it's likely that he was already in the early stage of altitude pulmonary edema, an extreme form of altitude sickness, in which the lungs fill with fluid, while it was on the summit. As fatigue approached, his descent became increasingly tiring, but he continued to struggle. It was like breathing with a plastic bag inserted in your head. Under the balcony, about above the South Col, he found the step slope too difficult to descend, so he decided to slide down seated. He had been accompanied all the way by 2 Sherpas, Sam and Lauren, who waited patiently for him at every step. They reached the bottom of the slope and still had half a mile to cross the flat expanse of South Col. But if the descent was a miracle, crossing a hill 10 meters before Camp 4 was too much. A few meters from their tents, John collapsed. He could no longer breathe, let alone walk. He saw his family in front of him, but it was just an hallucination. He felt it was over, only a quick death could save him. This time Lauren could do nothing to move him, so he went for help. A group of people arrived with tea, food and more oxygen. They tried to swap John's bottle, but as soon as he was disconnected from the gas, he began to hear. It took 6 Sherpas to lift him up, drag him the rest of the way to camp and throw him into a tent. At this point, two clients who had themselves just returned exhausted from the summit arrived and realized that what John needed was an dexamethasone injection. This is a potent steroid usually used by high-altitude mountaineers to get climbers to recover. A guy came from a rival team and administered the injection. It immediately worked, and John recovered a little, even though it was going to be a difficult night. John could not lie down because the liquid in his lungs would have dropped him. Initially, another Sherpa sat back to back with him for a couple of hours, until they set up some meds that John learned on. That night, John sat with his three teammates Laura, who administered the steroid, George, who remained in radio contact with base camp, and Lassie, who spent the night melting the snow and the stove for everyone to drink. He survived the night, but was still at Camp 4 at 8,000 meters, and he was far from safety, still in the dead zone. The next day the weather was good, but it took John more than 12 hours to descend the Lodge face to Camp 2. Lauren kept 2 places ahead of him, and Lucy 2 paces behind. At the bottom of the Lodge face, 6 Sherpas from another team arrived in a sled to haul John the remaining mile along the West Ground Plain to Camp 2. Twice they had to lower him into a crevasse and lift him up again on the other part. It took the assistance of about 20 people to help him from the summit to Camp 2. The following morning at 6 am, a pilot flew his helicopter into the thin air on the Western Crown to pick up John and take him to the Kathmandu hospital. In Kathmandu, he was diagnosed with high-altitude cerebral edema and pneumonia. He had been in the hospital for a week, but is now happily almost healed. The point of this story is that everyone, even the most experienced climbers, can have a bad day. Fortunately, in most cases on Everest, there are people there ready to help. Rescues like this, with heroes doing everything they can to give someone a chance to survive, are common on Everest, but we rarely hear about them. When there are deaths on Everest, all we hear from the media is that it depends on inexperienced customers who shouldn't be on the mountain. But most Everest climbers, like John, have every right to be there. There are people who have waited a lifetime for something unthinkable to use, but what we think is crazy for someone else is not necessarily crazy. It's true, every year the climbers who approach Everest are more and more going to risk their lives, often without any return, and less economic. Indeed, the costs to be undertaken are many. Yet the number of climbers increases from year to year, but if on the one hand stories are told of those who could not go back, on the other, the majority, there are positive stories of those who have left nothing to chance and partly prepared for the eventualities and difficulties they might encounter on that mountain. If you like these stories, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. Bye bye.